You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Our show today is going to tackle the concept of canceling. Cancel culture. What really is it? Where did it come from? How does it operate when somebody gets canceled? And is that actually a good thing? Or is it way out of control? My guest is Jessica Bennett, contributing editor to the opinions page of the New York Times, and one hell of a good writer and a smart millennial feminist. But before we get to Jessica, we need to go inside the headlines. You're not crazy. This is yet another chance to tell women we're not crazy. If you thought that vaccination for the coronavirus might have given you slightly skewed menstrual periods, you're not crazy. Did you know that a coronavirus vaccination can change the timing of when you get your period? Well, according to research reported in the Washington Post, that's true. Women have been going online all over the world and saying, something strange seems off with my period. Must be just me. But the study of nearly 20,000 women around the world shows that getting vaccinated against COVID can change the timing of the menstrual cycle. Overall, vaccinated women experienced on average about a one-day delay in getting their periods, compared to those who had not been vaccinated. The data, published last Tuesday in the British Medical Journal, was taken from a popular tracking app called Natural Cycles, and it included women from around the world, but, alas, most were from North America, Britain, and Europe. Because app users tracked their menstrual cycles each month, researchers were able to analyze 3 cycles before vaccination and at least 1 after, compared with 4 menstrual cycles in the unvaccinated group. The data showed that vaccinated women got their periods 0.71 days late, on average, after the first dose of vaccine. However, women who received 2 vaccinations within 1 menstrual cycle experienced greater disruptions. In this group, the average increase in cycle length was 4 days, and 13% experienced a delay of 8 days or more, compared to 5% in the control group. Allison Edelman, professor of obstetrics and gynecology at Oregon Health and Science University, led the study. She said that for most women, the effects were temporary, lasting for 1 cycle only, and that there were no indications that the period's side effects had any effect on fertility. Researchers don't know exactly why the vaccines affect menstrual cycles, but Edelman notes that the immune and reproductive systems are linked, and that inflammation or a strong immune response could trigger menstrual fluctuation. One major limitation of the study, in addition, of course, to its very limited geography, which tends to focus in a sadly racist manner on the global north, is the fact that it included only those women who were not on birth control, had regular cycles before they got vaccinated, and were between the ages of 18 and 45. Edelman says that preliminary findings from a different study suggest that getting a vaccine for coronavirus sometimes may cause heavier periods. That data, collected from nearly 10,000 women, is still undergoing peer review. Internationally, of course, the major story is the women's revolution in Iran. It's exploding across that nation, with the like never having ever been seen in any Muslim-majority country, Sunni or Shia. The trigger was the murder of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who was being held in detention by the so-called morality police, who patrol in search of any rebellion or disobedience by women about the draconian dress codes in Iran. They claim that a strand of her hair was showing. The ferocity of the protests was further fueled by evidence that Amini had been brutally beaten before she collapsed into a coma, dying, so they claimed, from a heart attack. Amini had been, in fact, modestly dressed, but that apparently didn't matter because just last month the morality police threw a young woman out of a speeding car for similar non-infractions of dress code rules. Hordes of people, mostly women, and all of them led by women, have taken to the streets all over the country, chanting death to the dictator, by which they mean Iranian leader Ibrahim Raisi, as well as setting fire to Ayatollah Khomeini's statues, confronting the morality police, stripping off their headscarves and burning them in public squares, and defying the rules further by cutting their hair, dancing publicly and joyfully, and daring the police to arrest them. Well, the police are, in fact, doing so, arresting people by the hundreds. And they've now taken to firing on crowds, and upwards of 30 people have so far died. Yet the protests continue. Social media is afire with videos somehow smuggled out showing this defiance, although Iran has shut down the internet. The United States has imposed sanctions on Iran's intelligence services and law enforcement agencies, but that is grossly insufficient. Please write your senators and congressional representatives to pressure the State Department to do more, much more, because the women of Iran need to know we are with them. This could be the tipping point in Iran, and of course, it's women. We need to take a short break here, but I'll be right back with my special guest for the conversation, Jessica Bennett. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My guest for today's conversation is Jessica Bennett, who is a prize-winning journalist and a contributing editor in the opinion section of the New York Times. She's also the author of 2 fine feminist books. One is Feminist Fight Club, a survival manual for a sexist workplace, and the other one, This is 18, Girls' Lives Through Girls' Eyes. She was the first ever gender editor of the New York Times, and she teaches a class called Reporting the Zeitgeist at the Graduate School of Journalism at NYU. As a writer, she's profiled Amanda Knox, Monica Lewinsky, and Jennifer Aniston, among others, and she's written features on the changing nature of sexual consent and the attempt to rebrand Playboy for the modern era. She spent months investigating sexual assault allegations against a popular playwright, Israel Horovitz, leading to his resignation. And she's also dared write about the overuse of, quote, trauma speak, close quote. She once wrote a tome about her resting bitch face, which may in fact still be the most read thing she's ever written. Jessica, welcome back to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a delight to have you. And full disclosure, listeners, Jessica's a friend as well. However, she also, in her other capacity, other than friend, in her other capacity as a contributing editor in the New York Times opinion pages and department, she recently wrote a really solid piece called Lea Michele and the Question of Second Chances, which was basically about somebody being canceled. Can you just quickly sum up what the piece said, and then we'll get into the deeper water?
Of course. So Lea Michele, who is not even somebody that I was particularly familiar with before, is an actress and singer and was the star of the show Glee. She is now starring in Funny Girl on Broadway. Mm-hmm. And a couple of years ago, she was, quote unquote, canceled. What that means, many people have different definitions, but a lot of people on Twitter called her out for disparaging remarks she made while on set. And in particular, a Black woman accused her of racial microaggressions. And so she, did the thing that people often do when they are, quote unquote, canceled. She apologized. She sort of went away for a while, and then we never heard from her. And so a couple of years later, she has returned in this new role. And the question of who should get a second chance and what amends they need to make in order to achieve that is what the piece tried to tackle.
Yeah, but you go into interesting different depths. You say, it's a country and a culture where we thought, at least, that second chances were an American thing, and we talk about it a lot. But once you get into social media, then you get, in effect, mob rule almost. We certainly at least don't have a good way of talking about redemption or who should be afforded it or who should, if apology makes any difference. And partly this is because we get apologists who are pretty shallow. And you point out the case of Johnny Depp, who has a history of atrocious behavior. And he just recently, at the MTV Video Music Awards, had a major role and is set to direct his first movie. And then there's the case of Will Smith. And then there's a lot of cases where you get people, and it does seem, I must say, they're mostly men. I have to say this not just because I'm a feminist, but because it makes me a little bit crazy, that women seem to get, with the exception of Martha Stewart, who actually served time, so they, they had to respect that. But we have these competing cultural scripts. In my case, I have a personal sticking point at Al Franken. I felt that what he did was stupid and bad and sexist. I did not feel that it was in the same since it was clearly harassment. Sexual harassment. But it was not rape. It was not assault. It was not all the things that other people have, in fact, like, it was not Harvey Weinstein. So when he got dumped from Congress, I was pissed, not only because we lost an interesting senator, but because I didn't see the point of it. And you point out correctly, that we don't have guidelines. We don't have, never mind celebrities, we don't have guidelines for anybody. Where is there a clear ritual for reconciliation? And do they exist?
I mean, I really don't think they do exist, at least not culturally. In the criminal justice world, there are processes and there's formula and there are reentry programs and there's this idea of second chances. And, however imperfect, very imperfect that system is, there's actually something to follow. But when we talk about people who have done things that are not illegal necessarily, but they've said something insensitive, or they've been a really bad boss, or they've been an asshole in some way. And they want to apologize for it, but we don't really know if that apology is authentic, especially in an age where it feels like people are apologizing just constantly for things they A, shouldn't apologize for, and then B, on Twitter or on social media for really serious crimes or offenses. It's almost like it's all gotten mixed up. There's this big stew of alleged affronts, and we don't have any way of differentiating between the Harvey Weinsteins who've committed crimes.
Right.
That's not what I would call a cancellation. That is somebody rightfully going to jail.
Damn
so of
right.
course he's appealing. And these subtler or murkier cases like Al Franken, or those who were accused of just being kind of an asshole in the workplace.
Yeah.
And, you know, have been taken down or allegedly taken down in like what you mentioned before, this kind of pile on that occurs on social media. And there's not really a comeback script, and there's not really a process they can follow. There's nowhere you can go away to sort of reflect on what you have done and who you have harmed and do a real apology and then come back. So everyone's just sort of making it all up, and they have PR people, and sometimes it's all dependent on how much money you have and how good your PR is.
Exactly. Yeah. I think of Louis C.K. I mean, part of this has to do with a lack of trust as well, because we don't believe them. And Louis C.K. was going to take lots of time and really disappear and really listen. And that was his statement. He was going to listen to women. And he has a daughter, for God's sake. And of course, he has been, at least for a year now, maybe more, appearing in clubs. And he appears in clubs and does his stand-up as usual, as a surprise tactic. He doesn't warn audiences. I mean, I've heard from women who were sitting in a comedy club and suddenly found themselves being, in effect, verbally assaulted by this man who has a history of exposing himself and forcing himself by surprise on women. So if there were a clear ritual for reconciliation, what do you think it would be, and who would who would adjudge it?
Who would get to do it?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, again, and I think we all know how flawed and racist and problematic the criminal justice system is, but there is an actual thing that occurs when you go away, and there are reentry programs and even some restorative justice programs where you can go and say, I have committed a crime, I have harmed this person, I want to make amends, and there are people who will help you through. And I think it's very, for lack of a better word, trendy right now among young people and different communities and in the social justice world to really want to give people who have done terrible things a second chance, largely in marginalized communities and largely within the criminal justice system. But then you have a friend who makes a mistake or says something rude to you, and they're done. They're dead to you. They're out of your life forever. So there's this sort of strange dichotomy happening where we seem to be able to have real empathy and a complexity in our understanding for some cases, but not for others. And so I was thinking to myself, could we create a system? Like, do we need to have a camp where canceled people go? Like, is there some sort of restorative system for those who are canceled? I don't really know what that would look like. And should the canceled people be in the same club as the Me Too people and those who've committed real crimes? Like, it's all confusing and murky, and there's no good solution. But there was a scholar that I spoke to. He's a business professor at Georgetown who had actually studied this and written a paper on it. And he talks about this as having to really go through three things. First, you have to acknowledge that you have committed some harm and really sit with that. And so, if you are a person who has been piled on the internet for doing something that you believe wasn't fair or you didn't really do, like, you're not going to be able to engage with this from the start. But you have to sit with it. You have to acknowledge it. You have to repair. You have to go to the person and, really show that you feel remorse, or do something to show publicly that you feel remorse in a way that feels authentic, not just like writing a 280 character tweet and dashing it off. and then begins this kind of redemption process. And, what does that look like? Well, people need to accept you. And so if you're a private individual, there are things you can do and steps you can take and real life conversations you can have with other individuals to say, I want to do better. Here are the steps I'm taking to do better. I want to reemerge into whatever it is you're trying to reemerge into. But for public figures, it's a little bit more complicated and confusing because I guess the public has to accept you and kind of take part in your redemption story. But at the same time, in cases of, for instance, Johnny Depp, let's say, the public doesn't necessarily need to accept him. He can just get the studios to accept him.
Yeah.
And maybe the public disagrees. So it's really complicated and there's not a clear pathway. So I'm sort of waiting with fingers crossed for like some academic restorative justice scholar to like create a 12-step program for these people. So at least we have some like paper we can print out to follow to try to figure out and look down the checklist of like, have they done these things? And if so, should we give them another chance?
That's so interesting. Well, that would work for celebrities. It would work and for business people, and it's also the drawing of the line, isn't it? I mean, it's like who draws the line? I mean, who says, well, actually, this was criminal assault, or no, he whistled at her. I mean, and that was so I and that takes,
and we only have different lines for what that behavior may be that we're willing to forgive.
Is this whole thing, do you think, because you're becoming an influencer, that's what you are. All of these terms, you're an influencer now. Oh wow.
I hate that term.
I know, but I do too, but I know an influencer. Oh, I know one. I know Jessica, and she's an influencer.
Well, you're an influencer too.
Oh,
you're
shut up.
An OG influencer.
What is an as an original gangster?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. It's really hard keeping up with all of this. I swear to God, particularly when you're a poet who loves the English language. And, well, here's the thing. Do you think that this will all go away? I mean, that maybe it's a passing fad. That maybe it's some parts of it won't go away because there's it's becoming institutionalized in certain ways.
Right. I mean, that's a really good question, and I think it's multifaceted because on the one hand, I think that we are rightly holding people accountable for bad behavior.
Yes, that part I think should stay.
Yes, of course. And suddenly we're in a world where, people without power have voices on the internet, and thus they do have some power. Mm-hmm. So if a person in a, high level of privileged position has a history of bad behavior, you actually have a voice to quote unquote call them out. But at the same time, I feel like we've kind of lost this ability to give people the benefit of the doubt or have some empathy. It's like we like to jump upon any bad behavior and declare the person, words like toxic or having inflicted trauma. And just sort of cut them off forever or not even be willing to see the complexity of the case. And most of these cases, all of the ones we've mentioned here.
Yeah, seeing complexity is definitely not a usual thing in these circumstances.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing too was, in the pandemic, we were all stuck at home. There was so much suffering and awful things around us. And it felt like we were powerless. And so I actually feel like, and I don't have the data to prove this, but I feel like this quote unquote cancellation or the calling out of people for bad behavior started to happen more. And maybe there was a power dynamic there where we, the public felt powerless, and the ability to criticize someone's bad behavior felt like something we could control. But I do think social media just flattens all of this to the point that, everything is lumped into the same category. And to bring it back to Lea Michele, this actor, some of the accusations of her terrible behavior and being a quote unquote nightmare to work with were when she was 12 years old. So she's being criticized in present day as a 30-something woman for her nasty behavior as a literal preteen. And that complexity just gets lost, or that nuance or that detail gets lost when we're all arguing about this in
And that's not
280
even
characters
complexity.
first.
It's not even complexity. It's that's just
Right.
history.
Fact.
That was, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So, this is part of a larger problem. I don't want to make it larger than it already is. But there is such a mob mentality, which has always started with against women online, and such vitriol that certain things become unsayable, untextable, Twitterable, untweetable. I mean, whether it's should a school teach Mark Twain or not, because that might be racist, or on the other hand, the genuine assaults against critical race theory that are going on from the right, and that's another line that to me is very clear should be drawn. But it is part of the same. Should we just blame the internet for all this? I mean, that would be a way out, wouldn't it?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, the internet can do so many wonderful things, but it's also pretty horrible in a lot of ways. And it allows us to, brush so many different types of people with the same stroke. And, there are, as you obviously know, there are gender dynamics behind all of this too. Like, we hold women to higher standards of integrity and warmth and being ethical. And so, is there some deep-seated bias in the way that people on Twitter were breathlessly trying to cancel Lea Michele for her past behavior in the way that they might not have for a man? Probably. There are racial dynamics to it as well. It's just life is more complex than social media can convey.
Well, dear. Well, we haven't really solved anything, and I'm somewhat more confused than I was even at the beginning, but I'm comforted.
Oh, no.
No, you've comforted me in a strange way, because I'm not even sure why. It's just that your piece thinks about it on the page and thought about it in the paper, and maybe that will get people to thinking about it, and maybe they won't make such snap judgments so easily from, while sitting at home and munching on Fritos. It's so easy. It's such a cheap shot. But on the other hand, when it is a serious pain-causing issue, then there should be some way of focusing on it and demanding or requiring or asking for and getting real regret. And and then being able to turn it around, because I do think Trump is to blame for a great deal of this as well, because he introduced j'accuse. He introduced it to the Americas and the world in a way we've never seen in a high-profile political figure. So I blame him for a great deal of it, which is convenient in a sense of me. But I do think he brought a level of real rancor, and is still doing it.
I think you're absolutely right. And because so many of us felt like there was absolutely no accountability.
That's right.
When it came to Donald Trump.
Exactly.
If we could enact or force accountability onto these lesser figures for much, much, much lesser behaviors, maybe that gave us some sense of feeling.
Yes,
like
exactly.
We had power.
I think you've hit on it. I think you've hit on the conclusion, which reminds me of what Flo Kennedy used to call horizontal hostility. She spoke of that in oppressed communities, among women, among Black people, among people of color in general. And she said, and she would say in her funny way, she would say, well, you got horizontal hostility here, because when you got vertical hostility, that can get you killed, can get you fired, can get your kids taken away from you, can get you laid off work. You got problems there. But if it's horizontal, if you turn it against your own sisters and brothers and your own movement friends and colleagues, there's no problem there, and you can trash them all you like. So maybe that's another part.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
I need to look that up. I hadn't heard Flo's words on that.
Yeah, horizontal hostility. Well, your words were wonderful, as are your books. And are you working on a new book now?
I'm trying to figure it out. Maybe I can come over and you can help me.
I'll be delighted. Anytime.
Maybe the podcast listeners can help.
Okay. All right. You got it. Okay, Bennett. Thanks so much. And thanks for being with us today. And thanks for not canceling us and being with us on Women's Media Center Live. Take care.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, Robin.
We have to take one more short break, and I will then be back directly with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Buzzwords are not necessarily fighting words. Cancel culture, sometimes termed call-out culture, is all the rage these days, particularly among young people, primarily young white people who seem to have pickpocketed the phrase from the black community yet again. But wait, let's, as they so lamentably say, unpack this. Critics of cancel culture argue that it has a clamp-down effect on public discourse, that it's unproductive, and that it doesn't bring real social change, causes intolerance, and can amount to cyberbullying when online. Defenders argue that cancel culture itself is a form of free speech, that it promotes accountability and gives the disenfranchised, women, men of color, other oppressed groups, etc., a voice and a no longer invisible presence. No one knows what to do about it except seethe with resentment. So let's go back to history and to blessed etymology. If you know how a word was born, you know how an idea was born. Ostracism, ostrakamos, was an Athenian male democratic procedure in which any male citizen could be expelled from the city-state of Athens for 10 years. Now, all these male words in here are there to remind us that women and the enslaved population in Athens were not citizens. So much for democracy. Some instances of ostracism clearly expressed popular anger at the citizen, yet ostracism was frequently used preemptively as a way of neutralizing someone considered to be a threat to the state or a potential tyrant, though in many cases popular opinion often informed the choice regardless. Ostracism wasn't practiced throughout the entire period of Athenian democracy, which is circa 506 to 322 BCE, but only occurred in the 5th century BCE. The name is derived from the pottery shards that were used as voting tokens, called ostraka. The singular was ostrakon in Greek. Broken pottery, easily available and free, served as a kind of scrap paper, in contrast to papyrus, which was imported from Egypt and too expensive to be disposable. Each year, male Athenians were asked in the assembly whether they wished to hold an ostracism. If they voted yes, then an ostracism would be held 2 months later. In a section of the agora set off and suitably barriered, male citizens, many of whom were illiterate but got to vote anyway, gave the name of those they wished to be ostracized to a scribe, and they then scratched the name on pottery shards. The shards, when piled up facing down, would keep the vote anonymous. An elaborate counting process followed, and the accused whose pile contained the most ostraka would be banished, provided that a male quorum was met. According to Plutarch, the ostracism was considered valid if the total number of votes cast was at least 6,000, the same number required for grants of citizenship in the following century. The person had 10 days to leave the city. If a return was attempted, the penalty was death. But the culprit's property was not confiscated, there was no loss of status, and after the 10 years the accused was allowed to return with no stigma. It was possible even for the assembly to recall an ostracized person ahead of time, if needed. For example, before the Persian invasion of 479 BCE, an amnesty was declared, under which Pericles' father Xanthippus was known to have returned. Ostracism was very different from Athenian law at the time, in which women couldn't participate in any event. There was no charge, and no defense could be mounted by the person expelled. The 2 stages of the procedure ran in the reverse order from that used under almost any trial system today, as if a jury were first asked, "Do you want to find someone guilty?" and subsequently asked, "Whom do you wish to accuse?" Equally out of place in a judicial framework is perhaps the institution's most peculiar feature, that it can take place at most once a year and only for one person. A further distinction is that ostracism was an automatic procedure that required no initiative from any individual, with the vote simply occurring on the wish of the male electorate, a diffuse exercise of power. By contrast, an Athenian trial needed the initiative of a particular citizen prosecutor. While prosecution often led to a counterattack, no such response was possible in ostracism, as responsibility lay with the male polity as a whole. That's oddly reminiscent of cancel culture. Last, there was, of course, the distinction that women and enslaved people were barred from all aspects of it. 10 years of exile, however difficult for an Athenian to face, were mild compared to the sentences inflicted by courts. When dealing with politicians held to be acting against the interests of the people, Athenian juries could inflict such severe penalties as death, unpayably large fines, confiscation of property, permanent exile, or loss of citizens' rights, which women never had to begin with. Tyranny and democracy had both arisen at Athens out of clashes between regional and factional groups organized around politicians. So as a reaction, the democracy strove to reduce the role of factions as the focus of citizen loyalties. Ostracism, too, may have been intended to work in the same direction. By temporarily decapitating a faction, it could help to diffuse confrontations that threatened the order of the state. This model, by the way, was followed by the framers of the U.S. Constitution in founding their new republic, and George Washington passionately argued against factions and political parties in his farewell speech to the troops. As an interesting aside, the threat to Athenian democratic systems didn't come from tyranny, but from oligarchic coups, not dependent on single powerful individuals, but rather on interlocking webs of wealth. In later decades, when the threat of tyranny was remote, ostracism seems to have been used as a way to decide between radically opposed policies. The motives of individual male voting citizens cannot be known. Many of the surviving ostraka name people otherwise unattested. They may just be someone who the submitter disliked and voted for in a moment of private spite. Some ostraka even bear the word limos, hunger, instead of a human name. So, now, back to cancel culture. We live in a judgmental society, one that is nervously flirting with becoming a shame culture. It's true that cancel culture muzzles free speech, but then one has to ask who has benefited, and still does, from freedom of speech. Who has profited and who has been muzzled, perhaps for centuries, perhaps forever? Is pornography violent? Pornography, just free speech? That's how it's usually defended. We need look no further than the origins of ostracism, Athenian democracy, in which women were not allowed to be citizens. Consequently, free speech for whom and when and how becomes a central question. But it seems to me that that question is answered by more free speech for more people, not less for some. And if there is justifiable paranoia about that some gobbling up what should actually be an infinite resource, then we have to fix that first. As a further irony, the term cancel culture itself appeared to have entered contemporary vocabulary via white people stealing the concept from black people again. Cancelled was an adjective used about another character by one character in the 1991 film New Jack City with Wesley Snipes. It meant, you're dismissed, you're out of here, you're dead to me. This usage popularized the term in African American vernacular English, soon enough to be ripped off by young white progressives desperate to be hip, cutting edge, and most crucially in lockstep with the progressive herd. As with the Athenian elite, the solution is being brought to us by the same folks who brought us the problem. So you get the identical tedious drawing of lines and sides, amounting to much sound and fury, signifying tweets. For instance, an open letter signed by 153 public figures, published in Harper's Magazine, set out arguments against, quote, an intolerance of opposing views, a vogue for public shaming and ostracism, and the tendency to dissolve complex policy issues in a blinding moral certainty, close quote. For instance, a response letter, organized by lecturer Arione Nettles, was signed by over 160 people in academia and media. It criticized the Harper's letter as a plea to end cancel culture by one written by successful professionals with large platforms who wished to exclude others who have been, quote, canceled for generations, close quote. The writers ultimately stated that the Harper's letter was intended to further silence already marginalized people, period. Clearly, there are some benefits to cancel culture, such as less powerful people squeaking through to gain a voice, helping marginalized communities hold others accountable when the justice system won't, and being a tool for social change. To be honest, though, I wouldn't call that cancel culture. That's just decent politics to me. That's revolution. That's evolution as a species. Whereas cancel culture these days seems to be more like something that 15-year-olds would do while hiding under their desks to dodge school shooters. I think it is stupid, racist, and really insane for right-wingers to attack critical race theory as something dangerously threatening, when in fact CRT is educative, enlightening, and inclusionary. I think it is just as stupid, racist, and insane for left-wingers to refuse to teach Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn because it accurately depicts racist dialogue during an era in the American South and is also a brilliant piece of literature against racism. But blaming without action gets us nowhere. You want to blame? I'll give you blame. I blame a great deal of this maelstrom on Donald Trump for having released his personal rancor to run wild through the American politic, and at least so far, go unpunished. I blame social media, which has given everyone a megaphone to blabber and blare contagious rage, whether anyone else wishes to hear it or not. I blame peer pressure and a lemming-like mentality, which is not, unfortunately, restricted to young people. I blame the Comstockian purists on campuses who set arbitrary rules for everything from politics to literature and language itself. Those pronouns. And leave no room for discussion, no climate for compassion or empathy, no remote possibility for nuance. I think no one should be barred from campuses because of their politics or afraid to speak up because of threats. But, by God, if those politics are odious, then let the free assembly march and demonstrate. I blame the Louis C.K.'s and Charlie Rose's and Bill Cosby's blithely carrying on their careers as if nothing fazed them, with no remorse or even minimal understanding. Some media commentators, like LeVar Burton, have stated that cancel culture should be renamed consequence culture, which is interesting, because it focuses on the idea that those who write or publish opinions or make statements should bear some responsibility for the effect of these on others. Consequences. Look, we've had cancel culture for real in this country. It was called McCarthyism, and it truly had teeth. It meant that someone named as a communist during the 1950s couldn't be hired, employed, befriended, defended. Careers, entire livelihoods were utterly demolished. With then-Senator Joe McCarthy on the rampage, the return of witch hunts was literal. This had victims committing suicide. Seemingly less major contemporary campaigns like slut-shaming can also see victims choosing suicidal exits. Bullying is still bullying, and the witch-hunting mentality runs deep in our human species, thrives in anonymity, and exults in self-righteousness. Besides, the fights against racism and sexism deserve better adherents than cancelers, who get off way too easily. Then again, I tell myself, the Athenians also gave it up as unworkable. And in this country, we periodically suffer social and political fads that sweep over us like locusts, but then move on. So I tell myself that this, too, will run its course. Fingers crossed. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at The Robin Morgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.